Thank you very much, and it is great to be here. Normally when I'm at the MSc, I'm laden down with responsibility, and now I'm free to tell you exactly what I think, up to a point. I don't pretend to the wisdom that many of you have here, but I can lay claim, I think, to a distinct experience, which is while during the last 30 years, you all thought that history had ended and we were in the postmodern phase and that geopolitical rivalry was a thing of the past. I was in the bit where that just wasn't true and history hadn't ended. And the type of stuff you're experiencing now was our everyday. So I thought I would just try and share a bit of that experience, because that's the background to the problem we're here to discuss. We haven't known each other for long, but I want to share one of the biggest disappointments of my life. And that is that it turns out, contrary to our expectations, that the internet is not necessarily on our side. We thought it was. We invented it. We thought dictators would have big trouble with the democratization of information. It turns out, tragically, on the contrary, that this technology can be bent to the purposes of societal control, and might even net out to the benefit of authoritarians at the expense of democracy. And when I think about the choices my children will have in the future, to my mind, they're dictated by two things. One, whether we get our act together on the climate, and the other is which value system is the default setting for our digital world. And it doesn't come any bigger than that. And these values, whilst we seek to do it in different ways, we must understand that this is systemic. There's a top-down version of the internet and a bottom-up version, and if you're an autocracy, you can only have the top-down version. And if you're a democracy, you can only have the bottom-up. And you need to tell me, I don't know how these things can be reconciled, but it's the context of what we're talking about today. And it means that the challenge we face is much larger than cybersecurity. It's about who owns the default digital commons. It's about our relative capacity to innovate as compared to our potential opponents. It's about who writes the rules, the boring issue of standards. But of course, given that the future of great power rivalry or value system competition is going to be around technology, it's inevitable that cybersecurity comes in. Cyber as the front line, and that is what it felt like when I was in office. Cyber's a big problem. If you define cyber as exploitation of faults in the digital ecosystem, which is what it is, if you look at the way the digital ecosystem is growing, clearly cyber is going to grow as an issue proportionately. But just to put it into perspective for a moment. First of all, I don't think we should be catastrophizing this. We focus a lot on cyber, IT, OT, making things go bang. That is indeed a problem. Ask me what the biggest damage caused to our society is so far. It's the drip loss of our IP and our strategic advantage over time, because we don't even understand the value of the information that we possess. And also, we can see some of the edges of the usefulness of cyber. Turns out, if you're Putin and you want to close down the Ukrainian electric grid, a classic network attack problem, it seems to be easier, if not cheaper, to drop an Iranian drone onto a transmission station. So there's something about this being a creature of the hybrid more than the kinetic war that I think is interesting. So when it comes to talking about what it's like to operate in this space from a national security perspective, I'm not going to talk about what we do particularly, but I would certainly very much like to talk about how we do it. And the first aspect, which is what you're talking about today, is of course teamwork. And for a bureaucrat like me, it's just a horror, cyber, because it cuts across all of the boundaries, all of the organizing principles, the difference between peace and war, the difference between domestic and international, all goes. And what the Russians taught us really early with the Gerasimov doctrine and the hybrid war was that if you can get over that and use that connectivity to effect, you'll be stronger. And a challenge for us is to organize for effect. I need to be honest with you, as we sought to concert our capabilities across government and internationally, this was the last thing we asked. As soon as you asked who was in charge, it froze the whole conversation. It was a nightmare. Now, you need to ask it. It's a good question to ask. But for me, I made sure it was the thing we asked at the end, not at the beginning. Fundamentally, this was a cultural issue, an understanding on everyone's part that they were responsible and that they needed to subordinate their institutional or personal egos to the task of making our society more resilient. And that's a leadership job. And if you've got a leader who doesn't understand that, then that question won't get you very far, I would contend. And then there's innovation. And if I was for a thing when I was the chief of MI6, it was that technology would be more of an asset to us than to our opponents. We invented it, why not? For that required us fundamentally to innovate faster. And for that to happen, there was bad news for someone like me in charge of a government department. Hierarchies don't innovate. Lots of you will be in charge of hierarchies, and you've just got to flatten them as quickly as you possibly can. Because what does a hierarchy do? Essentially, it separates knowledge from power. And you get a whole load of people like me in charge with the power, but you get a load of people on the front line who've got the knowledge but can't operationalize it unless you let them free. And I'll come on in a minute to why the West is going to win these various conflicts, and spoiler alert, that is the answer, is you locate the knowledge and the power at the edge and not in the middle. Now, what to do in the face of this threat from a government perspective? I'll just tell you a story. When you're in the National Security Council or whatever, wherever it is, and you get attacked in cyberspace as a country, you know what the politicians are going to say. They're going to say, where is the big red button that I can press to shoot back? Right? That's what they always ask. Understandably. I mean, it's really irritating when it happens. And I always had to explain that there isn't really a red button. But let's just quickly go there, the subject of offensive cyber. Offense and defense, as military people will tell you, are intrinsically bound up with one another. Most Western countries now have a declared offensive cyber capability, mine included. But I have always been rather skeptical about the concept of cyber deterrence, because it's not like nuclear war. There aren't binary actors, there are multiple actors. And attribution, of course, is a nightmare. So I've always tried to put people away from that idea. But equally, it has its place. I note that the ransomware attack problem has got less since our American colleagues stole some of the ransom back from our evil. I thought that was great. And I think Putin is in some way deterred from widening out the cyber conflict as well. For the West and for our response, I'm a believer in us doubling down on our strengths. We need to beat the Russians, not be the Russians. And what's our ultimate strength? It's teamwork. It's our capacity to ally. And if government has a role, it is to concert teamwork. That's what we have to do. There's some quite prosaic things we need to get better at. We need at least to agree the rules amongst ourselves, even if they're not going to be agreed globally. And we need common attribution tradecraft. We need to agree when we're going to call states out as bad actors. But the most important thing is for us to use our greatest strength to be a distributed system, to bring to life the power of the public and private working together. I think there's a real risk for government in introducing moral hazard, pretending that they can sort it out, that actually immediately undermines the solution to the whole problem. I asked a Chinese colleague who was going to win this competition, and surprisingly enough, he gave me a very frank answer. He said, we'll win anything that's centralized, and you'll win anything that's decentralized. So let's do that. This is all about us calling on the whole panoply of capabilities that already exist, primarily in the private sector. I should reveal a loyalty. I am on the board of Recorded Future, a digital intelligence organization. which absolutely knows where it stands on this issue and possesses capabilities that would have been the preserve of government only 5 years ago. There are many companies of that type, and I think the primary task for us is to concert the genius that sits in this room to effect. So my suggestion is that it's not really a question of asking who's in charge, it's a question of asking who is responsible, and the answer to that is all of you. Thank you.